This is the Uncolored Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Metcalf. Thanks for tuning in once again. You can get the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or Google Podcasts, I think they're calling it. And Podbean so far. I'm going to jump on some other things pretty soon. But thanks for tuning in. Please subscribe and rate the podcast. I'm going to get right into this because I've ran out of good ideas. I think I'm spent for coming up with great ideas that save the planet. So I'm just going to get right into the topic today. And it's going to be about science and evolution. But it won't be as boring as it normally is. I'll try to make it not that boring. But a couple of days ago, I'm coming down the hill from my house down to I-5. And it had been raining off and on for the last couple of days. And like it happens sometimes, there was just this amazing rainbow up in the sky. And rainbows, for whatever reason, never cease to just blow me away. Because it's like this perfect semicircle of just brilliant colors. And for seemingly no reason at all. It's just sitting up there in the sky like this huge advertisement for something. And I know people look at it different ways. You either look at it, and some folks will go, it's a manifestation of this, a creator or some transcendent being who's created the planet, and the rainbow is sort of another expression of that person. Or you're going to look at it as just some sort of a scientific anomaly that happened by chance and really doesn't mean anything at all. Which is fine either way. I mean, you believe what you believe, and I'm sure you've got reasons for it. But what occurred to me is when people look at things like that or how they view the world, everybody sort of has a different way of looking at it. There's big things that are all the same, but everybody sort of has a different sort of combination of ways to look at the world, which I think is fine. I think that's beautiful. I think it's great that everybody sees something different because you can always learn something from somebody who sees things differently than you. It's always a great opportunity to maybe find out something that you didn't know or didn't see it in a particular way. Different perspective. That's always better. That's always best. You don't have to accept it. But boy, hearing those things can really sort of jar your mind or give you a new idea. So I think that's great. But it also seems that there are people who hate that. They hate that you see the world differently than they do. They don't like that you have a different opinion. They don't like that you will look at facts or evidence or something that has emerged in front of you and come up with a different idea of interpreting it, of understanding it. People hate that. And not only do they not like having a different idea or having somebody think differently than they do, but they feel like it's now their job to make sure that you understand the world the way they do. In other words, they're not having you coming up with other ideas. It's either going to be this way, it's going to be in this kind of a box, and if you don't get it like I do, I'm coming after you. And I think that in a way, as I saw that rainbow and I started thinking those thoughts, it seemed to directly relate to the whole idea of this podcast. And I think it really comes down to the idea of this podcast is, well, it's what I call the big, I call it a big idea, but I'm fully aware that it's very possible that it is no big idea at all. But I think a lot of these conversations and a lot of the conflict that we get into has to do with that, has that at its foundation. The idea that one group of people or one person is not okay with the other group of people or the other person understanding the world the way they do. And not just that they're not okay with it, but somehow they've taken upon themselves as to make sure that everybody sees it the same way. And I think that goes back to what I talked about in the last podcast with the Tower of Babel. And again, I know it's just a story, and I'm not a preacher or anything like that. I don't even go to church, but again, as I say, I think you find truth wherever you find truth, whether it be in the Bible or a cookbook or a comic book. I don't mean to equate the two. I'm just saying, truth is wherever you find it. And so one of the things that I got from remembering that whole story, which I think is essential to this whole idea, is that apparently when after the flood and they landed wherever the hell they landed, what they were told by God was to go out in all the world and, do your thing, figure it all out. And what the folks wanted to do instead was to stay in one place and build this Tower of Babel, where they would have one city, they'd build this tower to themselves, and they'd kind of give themselves some shine, because check out what we did. And I think that those two things are always in conflict. You always have a group of people who kind of want to do things their own way, figure it out for themselves, and then you always have a group of people who want to force people to see it one way. And they're not having anybody thinking anything different or believing or understanding or operating in a way that's different from what this group of people think they should all think. And I think this is essential to this whole idea that I'm trying to figure out. So I wanted to look at that in a couple of ways, and it's clear in economics, it's very clear in politics, it's clear in social conversations, but it's very clear in this whole science thing. And I keep coming back to evolution and this other idea that at least I heard about back in the 80s, I think it was, called intelligent design. And again, I'm not a science guy. I'm just reading this stuff and trying, barely understanding it myself. But you can see some very clear through lines. And it seems that the established orthodoxy is evolution as the origin for everything. Even though there's a lot of scientists and very decorated scientists, Harvard, wherever you want to go, who look at evolution and see some serious problems with it, which is kind of what science is all about. I mean, somebody comes up with a theory, other people try to poke holes in it, you try to refine the theory, maybe you got to scrap the theory. You're just trying to look at evidence to come up with, a solution, or at least to figure out a reason how things occurred. At least I thought that's what science is about. But that's changed over the years, and it seems to have changed back, I think, in the 18 or the 1980s, or whenever the hell Darwin came up with that the book of The Origin of the Species. There was a lot of debate back then. And during that time, the sort of orthodoxy, most people, or I shouldn't say most, because I haven't done any polls or anything, but it seems like the prevalent theory at the time was many scientists believed in God and had no problem with the idea of a creative force and science working together. But somewhere during the origin of the species, Darwin's theory, that changed. And it seems like there's a group of scientists who said, listen, the only way you can have science is you got to remove any conversation of some creative force, some transcendent being. You can't have any of that. And anytime you try to introduce that, some sort of a cause, turns out we're not going to let you talk about it. We're going to say it's not science. And the only thing that can be science is something that has to do with natural causes. It can't be anything outside the box. In other words, for some reason, and I think I understand what the reason is, they sort of, what is that thing when you're a doctor and you cut something out? I don't know. There's a word where you use the knife and cut something out. But anyway, they cut out the whole idea of a transcendent being who created things. Didn't like the idea. And so now the only thing that can be called science has to be a natural cause. And I think one of the things that you hear oftentimes, or at least if you read these kinds of books or watch these lectures, is they'll say that the only thing that matters is matter, or matter is the only thing that matters. And anything beyond that doesn't matter. And so as a result of that, anything that the current orthodoxy or the naturalist box or the materialist box can't explain, they simply say, well, it doesn't exist. And one of the more recent things they do is they're trying to say that there's no such thing as the mind, that we're just a collection of random chemical forces that have no purpose and no reason, and anything that seems like mind or consciousness, it's just an illusion. None of that exists. And what I think that really is a result of is I think that scientists get frustrated when they can't measure or examine something or test it. If it seems to be beyond their ability to grapple with or put in some sort of, they just say, well, you know what, it doesn't exist, it's an illusion. And there was a lot of problems with that. One book by Thomas Nagel called Mind and Cosmos really gets into that idea of how evolution just simply can't deal with the idea of a conscious mind, and it does it very ineffectively. So, one of the ways that evolution has done this, where they're saying, listen, you've got to think like this in this box of reductionists and naturalism, and if you try to bring in anything that's not inside that box, we're coming after you. It's happened to a couple of scientists, and I'm going to use a couple of examples right here. One is the guy Michael Behe, and I've mentioned him before. He came up with this idea of irreducible complexity. And basically that says is that there's these very complex organisms, the eyeball, the flagellum. Those are the two that I always go to. I imagine there's more, but those are the only, that's all I can fit in my head right here. So I'm trying to keep it simple for myself. But the idea was that these things are so complex, they just popped out of nowhere. There's no precursors to them. And so Michael Behe rules out natural selection as a process for creating these complicated beings, or these organisms, I guess I should say. And so that's a theory that's out there, but it's rejected by the orthodoxy in science simply because the implications of that, one, destroys evolution as a theory, and two, the implications of that run into the theology of is there a creator? It's the natural conclusion, or the natural implications, the philosophical implications of that particular theory. And all of intelligent design's theories point to some sort of a creator, some sort of an intelligent agent that has caused the origins of life. And what I find is less, which you would think if somebody came up with a theory, what happens is the challenges to that idea of intelligent design are not necessarily challenges to the actual arguments that are made and the scientific data that's brought forth. The arguments are basically, hey, listen, it talks about God, so you're disqualified. We're not even going to talk about it. And it also seems to cause people who believe in evolution, or at least are trying to hold on to evolution, which I really think evolution is just a creation story for atheists. It seems like that's what it is. Religious people have their creation story, and the creation story for atheists seems to be evolution. That's the way they can cut any idea of a creator or some sort of a transcendent, agency out of the picture. And I think that's really what this comes down to. So I'm going to give a couple of examples. One is from Michael Behe, as I said. He works at this Lehigh College. He's a biologist there. And they did this crazy thing where, he teaches there. He's written books. He's got published papers. He's a scientist like everybody else. But the college, for some reason, thought it an idea to do this, which was stunning to me. So if you go to the website, I got it from the article. It's this article on, what do you call it? It's evolutionnews.org. And it's an article about Michael Behe and another guy named Minnich, who, persecuted. I don't want to say that's persecuted is a tough word, but I think it fits. Because here's a guy who's a scientist at the college, and the college puts out an official statement on their website. And if you go to the Lehigh University website, where, what's this guy? Behe's the scientist there. It says, it's so jacked up, man. It says that intelligent design has no basis in science, has not been tested empirically, and should not be regarded as scientific. Now, I get that. But when you go to the Lehigh University website, it's just 2 paragraphs that contain this statement. And it says here, while we respect Professor Behe's right to express his views, they are his alone and in no way endorsed by the department. Is our collective position that intelligent design has no basis in science, has not been tested experimentally, and should not be regarded as scientific. And now here's my thing. Look, credit to Lehigh University that it says it supports the freedom and free exchange of ideas. So God bless them for not shutting them out. But look, if you're going to make the statement, and if everybody agrees, just maybe 2, 3, 5 reasons why. That they put out this idea and this idea is wrong because, or this idea contradicts this, or this idea was contradicted by this evidence. And it's stunning to me that, again, supposedly, academic university, real smart people, there's such an utter lack of data and evidence in these, back and forths. And I'm an idiot. I know this wasn't written for me, but if you want to go, well, why do you think that? There's nothing here. Now I know you can go to a bunch of doctors and everybody's written books, Dawkins and everybody else has written books like that. But I'm just saying, if you're going to be the university that says something like that about one of your own doctors, that is so jacked up, man. Have one or two examples as to why you think that that's the case. That's all I'm saying. Give, again, a little bit of data and a little bit of evidence so we can go, okay, now I understand why you guys don't accept it. But there's none of that. And I don't know, I just thought that was kind of a dick move by the university. So there's another guy in this article. His name is Scott Minnich. So I'm going to read just a little bit of what happened to Scott Minnich. It said, let's see. So Scott Minnich, associate professor of microbiology at the University of Idaho, he says he decides to accept an invitation to testify about his research in court. All of a sudden, the president of his university issues an official statement labeling his research as unscientific and stating that only materialism can be taught in science classes. Now, understand this. Materialism is simply an a priori assumption. It has not been proven. It's the idea that if you can't touch it, it doesn't exist. Now, look, I don't know whether it is or not, but the idea that, again, mind, consciousness, your love of music, the love of your kids is simply a biological illusion that's the result of, random chemical reactions. That's a pretty wild idea in and of itself. But that's the accepted orthodoxy. And the college just makes a flat out statement and says, listen, if you don't believe in our religion of materialism, then you can't teach here. We only accept this particular religion. And it's a religious belief. It is not a scientific fact. It's an a priori assumption. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things that it can't answer. So it would seem that if you have an idea or a theory that goes beyond materialism, you would at least be able to explore it or at least present your information. This College of Idaho, we're having none of it. And they go as far as to tell everybody, hey, we got nothing to do with this. Which, again, seems dumb from a scientific perspective. If it was just about science, if it was just about free inquiry, you wouldn't issue those kind of statements, especially if you don't also support it with the data that explains exactly why this is not accepted. Other than saying, hey, it doesn't support our orthodoxy, it doesn't support our religious beliefs about science, so we're not going to allow it. It's that idea that I talked about in the beginning where there are folks that are not okay with you understanding data or information differently than they do. They're out to shut you down. And here's another example. This is a guy named, his last name is Sternberg. I don't know what his whole name is, but it's in the same article and it's just down below. So Sternberg, he has this article and he sends it through the normal peer review process. And it says it was confirmed later by the president of BSW. I don't even know what BSW is. Both an email to Sternberg and in a mail to an official at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. Meyer's article, Intelligent Design, the Origin of Biological Information and the Higher Taxonomic Categories. Oh, my God. I won't be reading that. Was published in the Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington. Oh, that's what BSW, the Biological Society of Washington, on August 4th, 2004. Now, this is where it gets weird. At the time, Sternberg did not consider himself an intelligent design proponent. So he wasn't even about intelligent design. He says, why publish it? Because he's on he's talking to somebody from NPR, the government radio. And it says, why publish it? because evolutionary biologists are thinking about this. So I thought that by putting this on the table, there could be some reasonable discourse. That's what I thought, and that was dead wrong. It said, amid uproar from the Smithsonian, the Council of the Biological Society of Washington decided to retract the article. But it says that wasn't all. Sternberg, again, he's a guy, he was, I'm not about intelligent design. I just thought this is something that biologists were talking about it, so I put it on the table so we can talk about it. This is what happens to him. Sternberg lost access to specimens and his master key at the museum. Rumors went around that he wasn't even a scientist despite his holding 2 PhDs in biology. His research associateship was not renewed. He was demoted. I'm not laughing about this because that's tough to do to a dude, but I mean, he puts forth an article and he's not even an intelligent design guy, and then they just make him a janitor. they strip. That is so jacked up, man. They strip him of his title. There was a show, my brother used to do this to me, called Branded, and it was like a military guy who was in the, I don't know, what was the war in with the cowboys against the Indians when they wore the blue uniforms, whatever that was. And one guy was dishonored, and they would go branded, and then we would rip all of his patches off his uniform. That's what I thought of when I read this about the Sternberg guy, man, because that's jacked up. He said, despite his holding 2 PhDs in biology, his research associate was not renewed. He was demoted to research collaborator. He was transferred to a hostile supervisor. His office was taken away. Sternberg also notes that the National Center for Biotechnology Information, part of the National Institutes of Health, was pressured to fire him. Sternberg filed a complaint with the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. Unfortunately, they were unable to complete the investigation due to jurisdictional issues, but they did tell him in a letter, it is also clear that a hostile work environment was created with the ultimate goal of forcing you out. So, and he ends up resigning after that. But all the guy did was submit an article by Stephen Meyer. And Stephen Meyer is one of the lead proponents of this intelligent design. He goes, listen, biologists are talking about this. I'm going to submit it. And they branded him, man. They made him a janitor. That is effed up. But listen, this is what happens in all of society. It could be your job, whatever it is. If you dare to question whatever the religious orthodoxy is, it's unproven. It's just an idea that they got, but they're saying, listen, this is our idea. We don't want anybody thinking anything different. And if you do, we're coming after you. And this is a perfect example of that. And listen, this ain't the only example. There are, I don't know, dozens, hundreds of examples of this. And a lot of these guys will tell you, listen, there are a lot of folks who see this intelligent design thing as a valid theory, but they aren't saying nothing because they don't want to get Sternberged. They don't want to get the Sternberg treatment, so they just keep their mouths shut. Because it's clear, colleges aren't having it. They're not going to allow you to do, or at least if they allow you to do it like they did with Behe, they're going to make sure on their website that they say, hey, listen, we don't even know who this guy is. He works here. We see him in the hallways, but we have nothing to do with what he's doing here. I think that's effed up, man. So listen, there's a lot of this going on in science. And when people tell you that science is just this objective search for truth, they're full of shit. Sorry about that, Babos. He hates it when I use that kind of language. Sorry, buddy. Different sides are trying to use science to support their a priori ideological and religious beliefs. That's all it is. And if you're on the outs, if your religious beliefs are not the orthodoxy, they're coming after you. And if your religious beliefs happen to coincide with the orthodoxy, you're going to get lots of grants, you'll get lots of awards, you'll be at dinners and all that good stuff. They're going to treat you right. It has absolutely zero to do with an objective, scrutiny of the evidence, period. So, the next thing I want to do is I want to look at a couple of things. So a lot of times when I'm looking through this stuff, there's always articles or a video somewhere that says we've debunked something. And I guess then I figured out the whole debunking thing means they've somehow proved it that it's totally wrong, which I like to see, because that's at least some sort of an argument you can look at. You can see the evidence on one side, and then somebody else presents the other evidence on the other side, so you can actually tell what's going on. Unfortunately, oftentimes when you see a headline saying such and such was debunked, it comes no place near it. Usually what they're doing is either they never address whatever argument they're supposed to be debunking, or, which is one of the things I'm going to show you next, is they simply just create a straw man. They embellish or make a caricature of the argument and then debunk the caricature that they've just made and never actually touch the argument. So the first one is from everybody's favorite atheist, Richard Dawkins. And he's on this show where the guy interviewing him is talking about Michael Behe's theory of irreducible complexity. And that's the idea that there's some, organisms that are so complex that they could not have evolved through natural selection. So whoever the interview is, and I'm sorry, I don't know his name, but he asked Richard Dawkins about it, and Richard Dawkins tells this story. And I'm not going to get into the whole thing because it's rather long, but I'll try to give you enough so you can at least get the idea. But I encourage you to go watch the video on your own, because it's a very good illustration of what I think is somebody just simply not just bypassing the argument, but I think what he does is exactly what, when I say he, I'm talking about Dawkins. I think what Dawkins does is exactly what he accuses religions of doing, which is just making up this unsubstantiated story to explain what they think possibly happened. And for some reason, if you're an evolutionist and you make up a story, if you pull a story out of your ass, it's somehow science. But if you're in a religion and you make up a story, if you have some sort of a story that's supposed to explain, that's religion. It's stupid. You shouldn't even believe it. But evolutionists can make stories all they want to, and it's no big deal. So I'm going to show you an example of this right here.
How could we have been bumping around without sight for thousands or millions of years if we've evolved, when really it needed to be functioning from the word go?
Well, yes, all right, I will answer that question. Certainly, you're absolutely right. The eye is a most remarkable organ, and it does the same sorts of things that these television cameras do. It does instant focusing. It does instant stopping down with the iris diaphragm. It's got full color, three color vision, just like modern televisions have, and it is a remarkably beautiful. It's not totally flawless. There are interesting flaws, interesting imperfections, which actually are revealing. Nevertheless, it does work very well, and an engineer would give it somewhat high marks for being well, quote, designed. Now, you raise the question, doesn't it all have to be working before it's any good? How could we bump along for millions of years with only half an eye? That's a bit of a fallacy, because actually only a quarter of an eye, only 1/100th of an eye is better than nothing. You can make a slowly climbing ramp of improvement from just the very rudiments of vision, just say being able to tell the difference between light and shade, nothing more than that, right up to the perfection of a human eye or the eye of a hawk, say. And in order for evolution to explain that, all we need is that there should be a ramp of improvement where every step, 1/100th of an eye, 2/100ths of an eye, 3/100ths of an eye, etc., 50% of an eye, 51% of an eye, each step has got to be an improvement on the one that went before. And it's easy to see why that would be. You start by being able to tell whether there's a shadow, whether it's night or day. Shadow's useful. That could be a predator moving overhead in the sea. Night or day is obviously useful for all sorts of purposes. Then you could imagine a cup. Instead of just having a flat sheet of light-sensitive cells, the edges turn up into a cup. Now the cup means that if there's light coming from that direction, it hits that part of the eye. If there's light coming from that direction, it hits that part of the eye. So already the animal can tell the direction from which light is coming and the direction from which a shadow is coming. So we haven't got an image yet. All we've got is the direction of light. Now the cup can steadily and slowly over evolutionary time close over until you end up with a little hole at the top. And the little hole at the top, the same principles working all the way, that light coming from that direction hits that part of the retina, and from that direction hits this part of the retina. But because there's a hole, it's rather more precisely, not exactly focused, but light from there hits there, light from there hits there, light from there hits there, because it's got to get through the hole. We're moving towards a pinhole camera. Now, a pinhole camera, if you make the hole small enough, and remember we're having a smooth gradient of closing up the hole, if you make the hole small enough, then it makes a sharp, focused image. The trouble with a pinhole camera...
Now, he goes on, and again, I encourage you to look at the full video of him talking there, but it's a nice story. It's a plausible story, even, I guess. It's just that there's absolutely zero evidence for it. I mean, the Cambrian era, whatever the hell, the explosion, whatever they call it, all of these phyla just show up out of nowhere, eyes fully formed, fully complex, ready to go. None of these pinhole cameras or the flaps going, none of this imagine this or imagine that. It's a good story, but it's just a made-up story. He pulled it out of his ass. Could have happened. Who the hell knows? But it would just be nice if all of these, evolution is a confirmed fact thing, would just have a little bit of evidence for the stories that they're putting forth. That's all. And if he came and says, well, listen, you have this era, you got the pinhole eye, and in this era, you got the flap coming over. I mean, if you could demonstrate it with fossil record, listen, you got me. I'm fine with it. I would love to read it and understand. But if you're just pulling this out of your evolutionary ass, I don't know how that's any different from the Adam and Eve story or Noah's Ark. You make up stories that support your a priori religious beliefs, and then you walk away like you've done something. And I just don't understand how one is science. If you're a materialist or a naturalist and you make up some story, it's science. And if you're a religious person, you make up a story, that's somehow nonsense. I used to do that when I didn't have my homework. I'd make up a story. Or if my grades were bad, I'd have a story ready. It wasn't true. I had no evidence for it, but I hope it would just get me past, get me out of trouble. That seems like what it is. I don't know. This is how it possibly could have happened. Yeah, possibly. Any evidence? Not a shred. I'm just saying, why can't the rules be the same, whether you believe in evolution or whether you don't believe in evolution? What are all the, why are all the mulligans given to the evolutionists to make up stories and not have evidence and have a bunch of holes in the theory? But then say, hey, listen, if you can't explain it this way, then we don't want to hear it at all. I don't understand that. So here's the second thing. The second thing is another YouTube video that's supposed to debunk the idea or the theory of irreducible complexity put forth by biologist Michael Behe. And this is from a kid on the YouTubes, and he does a really good job. Very high production. He seems like a very intelligent young man. It's just that it's a specious argument. And what he does is he takes Michael Behe's assertion or his argument regarding irreducible complexity, and then he kind of adds to it and then debunks the add-on, the mischaracterization, the caricature that he just made, the straw man. So here's this kid. It's from a site called, I think it's Reality Rules. And again, I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's a pretty long video. Well, not long, but longer than what I need. But I encourage you to go take a look at it so you can get the full context of it, because, again, I don't want to misrepresent people's opinions or what they're saying, and you should see it for yourself in case I am doing that. So here's this kid.
In 1996, the intelligent design advocate Michael Behe published a book titled Darwin's Black Box, and in which he asserted that certain biological systems, such as the human eye, are irreducibly complex and that therefore they must have had a designer. A very, very specific designer.
That kid's got a cool voice. I wish I could talk like that. I just wanted to stop there for a second because as he states the argument, it's not incorrect totally. I do believe that Michael Behe and many of the proponents for intelligent design do believe in God. I think that's very clear, and they all state that. Even though there are many intelligent design proponents who are atheists and don't believe in any God at all. But I do believe that many of the proponents do believe in God. However, that's not the argument they make. There's a scientific argument that they make, and there are philosophical implications from that scientific argument. So I think it's important to not conflate the two, which is, I think, what he does there. And that's where the problem is for me. But he'll expound on it, and it'll become a little bit more clear.
To quote Behe, the man who coined the term in the first place, irreducible complexity is just a fancy phrase I use to mean a single system which is composed of several interacting parts, and where the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to cease functioning. Behe then goes on to explain that certain biological systems, such as the human eye, are also irreducibly complex, and that due to their irreducible complexity, and this is where the real assertion is being made, they could not have evolved via small modifications through natural selection.
Now, up to this point, he's fine. I mean, he states the argument better than I ever could. I gotta tell you, man, if I sounded like that, you would never hear the end of me, man. Well, maybe you would, but I would listen to myself all the time. I'd read books out loud, man. That's a great voice. But he explains the argument. He lays it out perfectly. But then for some reason, he seems like he makes this left turn. Or at least that's what it seems like to me.
However, for the purposes of clarity, let's present this argument in a syllogistic form. Irreducible complexity can only be created by an intelligent designer. The human eye is irreducibly complex. Hence, an intelligent designer must have created the human eye. Therefore, God exists.
Syllogism. I'm going to steal that word. Just use it. The bakery. At the gas station. Syllogism. Nobody's going to know what I'm talking about, but it doesn't matter. It makes me seem smart. Syllogism. But I think that's where the argument goes wrong. When he adds on that little syllogism, whatever the hell that is. You should get triple points. If you're at the bakery, when you're holding that piece of paper and they call your number and you can fit syllogism in somewhere, like, you should get extra points for that somehow. Syllogism. I'm stealing that. But it's not that Michael Behe and many of the proponents for the theory of irreducible, what did I say? Intelligent design. I can't do this very well. for intelligent design, they believe in God. Many of them do. There are some that don't. But you know, I'm nothing up my sleeves. You don't want to hide the fact that many of these people believe in God and they think that many facts in science point to the existence of God. That's very clear. But that's not the argument that irreducible complexity makes. It simply says that natural selection could not be a mechanism for irreducibly complex organisms. That's it. And if you think I'm nitpicking, let me give you an example that I think makes more sense. So imagine you're an investigator and you have some incident that occurred that you're supposed to be investigating. Okay. In those incidences, it's not always it's either that person or it's not that person that you think might have done it. Oftentimes there's a lot of possible, suspects who could have been responsible for it. And oftentimes when you look at the evidence or when you look at the data, it doesn't necessarily point to someone. Oftentimes you're canceling out a suspect. You're eliminating possible suspects responsible for the incident. And that's what this is. So, for example, if you know that the incident occurred at 8 o'clock at night, right, and one of the people who possibly could have been involved with at that time was, I don't know, on a plane flying to London in front of a whole bunch of credible witnesses, well, then that person couldn't be responsible for it. And that's it. And the fact that you've canceled out one person being able to be responsible for the crime doesn't mean that it points to anybody else. So the idea of, because of irreducible complexity, therefore there must be a God, that is not the argument. Irreducible complexity does not prove the existence of God. As a matter of fact, science doesn't have anything to say about whether or not God exists. That's a philosophical argument. That's a religious argument. And it's the same thing for God not existing. Those are philosophical arguments. They're not scientific arguments. And data and experiments and those kinds of things, they may suggest one possibility or the other. But as far as proving it, it doesn't do that. Michael Behe doesn't make that argument for irreducible complexity. And so for this young gentleman, again, great production value, drama, music, his voice, I wish I had it, but it doesn't work. It's a swing and a miss. And all I wanted to point out is that oftentimes you have to be meticulous. You really have to scrutinize arguments that are being made either for or against something, because oftentimes it'll sound like a good argument. Dawkins' story sounds like a great story, but where's the evidence? There is none. None of those transitional eyes that he explained could possibly, and if you imagine this and maybe that, it's all a great story. No evidence for it. And the idea that the young gentleman presented, that irreducible complexity somehow proves the existence of God, nobody's making that argument. Or at least Michael Behe is not making that argument. So to attribute that to him and then say I debunked it, that's misleading, in my opinion. And I'm not saying the guy's got anything up his sleeve or he's trying to do anything deceptive. I'm just simply saying if you're not really critical, if you're not meticulous, if you're not careful about the arguments that you make, you can mislead people with the information you put out there. And listen, I'm not immune to it myself. That's why I hope, that people will keep me accountable. Everybody has to be accountable. Everybody needs to be criticized. That's how you become better at not only making arguments, but thinking critically, which is hopefully what, people are trying to do. Well, you wouldn't know it by what a lot of things are going on, but that's what you would like to be able to do. So I'm going to end it there, but I went on a long time. Usually I have a sports segment after this, but I'm not going to do anything this time. It's been long enough hearing me yammer about stuff. So I'm going to end the podcast right there on that note. I appreciate you listening, hanging in there for the one person who made it to the end of the podcast. I got to start doing something. I should give somebody, give them a prize or something for hanging in there, because I got to imagine it's tough sometimes. So that's the end of the podcast. Thanks for listening. I'll come back next week with another podcast. Again, you can get it on iTunes, Google Play, the Podbeans, and pretty soon there'll be some other places you can get the podcast. I'm trying to get better at this stuff. But thanks for hanging in there. My name's Kevin Metcalf, and this is the Uncolored Podcast.